Now that we have everybody here, I'd like to officially kick off the session. Perfect. If you wouldn't mind just putting yourselves on mute for a few minutes, and then I'll pass it on to you. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our session, Boosting Biodiversity via Sustainable Accommodation. My name is Ali Dragozet, and I'm the founder and CEO of Seagoing Green, and this year's Sustainable Tourism Ambassador for the Connecting Nature Enterprise platform, and I'd like to welcome you to the summit. So you have a chat function to the right of the screen. It'd be great just to see where everyone is calling in from and what sector you actually work in. If you click session, oh, perfect. Great to see. So I'm excited to share with you some of the great panelists that we have joining today, but first I'm just going to run through our session's agenda quickly. So here is the overview of our agenda for today. I'll give a really brief introduction of Seagoing Green and who I am, leading into the session beginning with defining sustainable tourism and nature-based solutions, including what we'll be focusing on today specifically, which is boosting biodiversity via nature-based solutions. And then I'm going to pass it on to our amazing panelists. We'll round out the session by opening the floor to a 10-minute or so Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat during our session, and we'll get to all of them at the end. So, as I mentioned, I'm Ali Dragozet, founder and CEO of Seagoing Green. I'm a marine and freshwater biologist who used to work in the tourism industry, and I founded Seagoing Green a little over 4 years ago. We're a sustainable tourism consultancy based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, but we're operating globally. We were founded in 2017, which was actually the same year that the United Nations World Travel Organization named it the Year of Sustainable Tourism. And our big mission is to alleviate the negative impacts of the tourism industry on the marine environment. We do this by directly working with marine tourism operators such as river cruises, yachting companies, coastal hotels, and the public sector to work on the destination level. We really specialize in carbon footprint measuring and then building sustainability strategies from there. We also help implement those strategies and facilitate trainings and workshops and branding, as well as partnership opportunities for our clients so that they can get the best sustainable products and services. So tourism is actually set to hit 1.8 billion international tourism arrivals by 2030. But before COVID, we saw tourism booming in every corner of the world. And while quick money was being made, the environmental health of destinations was severely degrading to the point of being shut down in some areas like Maya Beach in Thailand and Boracay in the Philippines. With travel now being brought to a halt, we saw biodiversity thriving again in areas where they haven't in years. It has become more and more obvious than ever that in order for tourism to continue, changes must be made to adapt for the balance of people, planet, and profit. Post-COVID, tourism is expected to return to the levels that we saw prior to the pandemic a few years from now. So now is really the moment to start on the right track. Going beyond sustainable tourism, which is really not to leave a negative impact on the local community, the environment, and the economy, we have nature-based solutions, which takes it one step further. The IUCN defines it as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So this has been increasingly applied in design and sustainable tourism development. And specifically, biomimicry-inspired designs are considered desirable for being unique, luxurious, and low impact. For the purpose of this session, we'll be focusing specifically on accommodations using biomimicry in their operations and architecture as nature-based solutions. Joining us first will be Pascal, who is the Sales and Marketing Manager from Hotel Jakarta, Amsterdam, a hotel commonly referred to as a place where two worlds connect. It is a true green oasis in the city center of Amsterdam, from its architecture to its operations. Hotel Jakarta is a wonderful example of how a balance can be struck between creating a unique hotel offering while integrating innovative NBS to lower your environmental footprint. Our second panelist is Louis, founder of Nomadic Resorts, who will explain the inspiration for his work and his unique designs and most famous collaborations with international resorts like the Banyan Tree, Soneva, among others. Nomadic's focus is to build bridge between people, nature, combining sustainability, wellness, and outdoor adventure tourism seamlessly into luxury hospitality designs.
All right, hang on a second. Let me see if this works for me. Okay, can you see my screen full screen?
Looks great, thanks.
All right, perfect. Okay, well, listen, I'll just get stuck in. Well, thank you very much for inviting me firstly. And what I'm going to discuss with you a little bit now is the notions of biophilic design and rewilding strategies and how we might be able to create a new nature-positive hospitality model using these strategies. So, a little bit of an introduction to these thematics for those who aren't familiar with these terms. So basically, biophilic design is the theory, science, and practice of bringing buildings to life to create a healing, living environment. This is an indicative image of the way that this can be achieved by integrating natural elements, textures, plants, and views into our living spaces. So Christopher Alexander, very famous writer on architecture, talks about our emotional freedom. Our spirit is nurtured and supported by those environments which are themselves alive. And maybe I'll just explain a little bit that, you know, in many instances, a lot of people are living in what I term, you know, dead spaces almost, areas which have very little life and which are a little bit sterile and climatically controlled using fans, as opposed to natural ventilation. And I believe that this is actually probably not very good for you long term. So the other notion, this is a little bit of a different idea, which is a concept called rewilding. So rewilding activities are conservation efforts aimed at restoring and protecting natural processes and wilderness areas. They can include providing connection between conservation areas and also reintroducing apex predators and keystone species. So this may seem a rather exotic or foreign notion, but essentially what we're talking about here is going beyond the traditional notion of protecting a specific area, but actually trying to regenerate that area and enhance the biodiversity on the site. And this can have radical consequences. And one of the classic examples is the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone Park, which had a multiple cascade effect on the rest of the ecosystem, to the extent that it even changed the course of rivers. But you know, rewilding is not about abandoning civilization, but it's about enhancing it. It is not to love. It is to love not man the less, but nature more, as George Monbiot said, who's a leading environmental thinker. And what we're interested in here is reintroducing some wilderness spaces back into the European environment. You know, intensive industrial agriculture has sort of dominated our landscapes for centuries now. And maybe there's an opportunity to bring back some of the traditional species that you know have gone extinct. You know, one interesting example being the beaver. So I hope that you've got a little bit of an idea of the kind of ideas that I want to discuss here. Now, this is a very slightly scary map, which shows the effect that COVID-19 has had on the tourism industry across the world. So what's interesting about this pandemic and the resulting travel ban is actually it's exposed many vulnerabilities that were in the hospitality industry even pre-pandemic. there was a growing contradiction between the expectations of modern travelers and the way that the industry was managing the natural capital on which the guest experiences it was selling are built. So, if you're selling an exotic vacation experience to your guests and introducing them to a new environment, then long-term, that natural capital, it's in your long-term financial interest to protect that and enhance that natural capital. And what we believe is that basically the industry has a unique opportunity to reinvent itself and to be a core theme in the green recovery, in this aim to shape a circular economy. But to do that, I think that hospitality has to change significantly. And go beyond the traditional notions of conservation, efficiency, sustainability, waste management that have started to gain traction over the last decade. And then really rethink this thing and think, how can we create nature-positive business models that change the very idea of travel? So what we're going to do in the next 15 minutes, I guess, is to adopt tools, see which tools are available, not just to mitigate the impact of climate change, of conventional travel, but to deliver a cultural transformation and to help people reconnect with the ecosystems that they inhabit. So this has very much become a core part of our work at Nomadic Resorts, and I'd like to believe that we've been at the forefront of this movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically illustrate the different tools using projects that we've designed or built, either with Nomadic Escapes or Nomadic Resorts, or with our previous employees. Okay, so one of the first things is sensitivity. What we really have to do is we have to understand the context of the site. So throughout our work, we've used ideas of biomimicry and green building strategies to develop structures that respect the physical environment that they exist in, rather than compete with it. So, for example, this gives you a notion of a building. This is a bar, and this is a restaurant. And the idea was to integrate these buildings into a boulder-strewn landscape along the coast of southern Sri Lanka. And I think this was the space in which we came up with the conceptual direction of integrating these boulder-like structures into the environment. And this is the finished product at the end of the construction process. Then there's very important ways of integrating this sort of key elements and colors and textures into spaces. So I'm going to run through a few of them, and I'll explain each example in a little bit of detail. So natural pigments such as earth tones and complex natural textures really change the perception of space. So if you take this example, which is the reception area of Wild Coast Tented Lodge, what we did in this space is you can see multiple textures within this environment. You've got stonework around the perimeter and these boulders which were used to create the foundations of the structure. And then this daybed that we created in a very organic, natural form was actually made from mud bricks that we made ourselves on site with the local community, using local clay, rice straw, and strange enough, elephant dung, which we mixed into bricks and made adobe bricks and built this with. So as you can see, the actual materials have patina. It's a much more interesting and emotionally fulfilling interaction with your environment when you have things that have texture and complex patterns. Another very, very important element is water. So water elicits a really strong emotional response in people. And by integrating waterscapes into building design, we can really create very healing, serene environments. So I chose this image because I think there was something that was quite successful in this project, was that we managed to integrate the swimming pool going right through the building. So the swimming pool goes right through the center between the restaurant and the bar. And what that created was that there's a reflection of sunlight on the water, and which creates this kind of dappled pattern of lighting effect on the bamboo grid shell above, which is really, you know, really changes your way of feeling the space. And you know, I think we also kind of got the watercolor right, using slate tiles. So the other thing is, of course, ventilation, and this is one of the things that I spend a lot of time discussing this in some depth with clients. Most people actually prefer natural ventilation over processed and stagnant air. Okay, it actually makes you feel better. The perception of movement of a breeze across your skin is actually, you know, helps you connect with your external environment. What's happened in the hospitality industry is, you know, probably the travel agents and tour operators is to some extent responsible for kind of imposing air conditioning, even in areas which didn't necessarily need to have the cooled air, or only required cool air at very specific times of the year. What we've tried to do is we tried to explain to people that, you know, you don't necessarily need to have a fully air conditioned space for it to be comfortable, or to be luxurious. So for us, this is a bar we've been designing in the Maldives. You know, this is a more luxurious space for us than a concrete air conditioned box. You have ceiling height, you have cross ventilation, you have exposure to the sea and the environment around it. And then, you know, of course, another thing that's, you know, absolutely critical for human well-being is daylight and sunlight. It's consistently identified as an important and preferred feature in the built environment, and it is in fact, you know, extremely important for your health. You have only over 500 receptors in your DNA that react to sunlight. So if you don't go outside, you know, and going outside and exposing yourself to fresh air is a critical part of human well-being, and it's innate. So, you know, we have an innate need to connect with our environment, and sunlight is a very, very critical part of that. Of course, in this particular building, which is the inside of one of the prefabricated tents that we designed, you know, we played with the natural light through these bay windows by incorporating reflective space doors, so that you had a full-length mirror, and you know, the space was still more illuminated. So flora, so plants are fundamental to human existence. Their incorporation into the built environment can enhance air quality, well-being, and performance. We see this in multiple studies, both in terms of schooling, education, performance, prisons, healthcare centers. There's a very, very strong correlation between you know, somebody's experience of their environment and their well-being, and the increased sense of well-being by places which have abundant plants. And then fauna. So, you know, we don't always have to do everything literally. It's not a literal game. So animals are similarly basic for human existence, but the presence of animal forms provokes pleasure, stimulation, and emotional interest. But that doesn't need to be a photograph of a fox, or, you know, an exact replica. It can be a general biomimicry design that's inspired by a natural form of an animal. For example, in this case, this is they're called the Den, which is in Sonavakiri in Thailand, which we built a long time ago, back in 2009. And this is inspired by a manta ray, and made entirely out of Dendrocalamus asper bamboo. And then, you know, moving on a little bit from that, there's also this notion of patina, which is basically the process of aging, weathering, is a dynamic feature of natural materials, and it gives something a little bit of soul. You know, a sterile PVC and aluminium environment essentially doesn't change. There's no significant modification to that environment, and no adaptation to time. Whereas if you take something like copper, you're going to see a pattern of form naturally, or an oxidization. Same with steel, you get rust. Timbers become different tones as they're exposed to sunlight. So rather than fighting against this, with varnishes and polyurethane finishes and other such things, which quite often are toxic, we think that, you know, if you want to develop a really natural building process, then adopting the patina as part of the aging process and accepting it and almost embracing it can actually enhance the feel of the building. Okay, vista. So this is this is an interesting one. You know, people basically express a strong, consistent preference for exterior views, particularly when the vista contains vegetation and water. So the example I've taken here is kind of a radical one. This is a treetop dining pod that we built in Thailand, which allowed guests to basically have lunch or dinner at 11 meters up in the top of the canopy of the rainforest, where you have, you know, a multitude of birds, insects, squirrels, and all sorts of other wildlife, which is immediately, you know, literally a part of your dining experience. And you know, that notion of vista is super important for human well-being again. Apologies for the slightly blurred image. This is one of my first projects. So this is how do you incorporate vegetation into the actual architecture. So this is a project I did a very long time ago, back in 2007, 2008. But green roofs and facades often provoke interest and satisfaction. They also enhance the performance of the building in terms of its thermal performance through the insulation values and they also help you to manage stormwater by basically slowing the percolation of rainwater before it goes into your drainage system. And it also, you know, it can be a very, very useful tool to integrate a building into the site. And really, you know, I think that one could aspire to creating buildings that are literally almost invisible, which are so well integrated into their environment, so subtle in their detailing that the building is barely visible. And then prospect. So this is a slightly foreign idea to many people, and I probably have to explain this in a slightly different way. But this is a very ancient sentiment, and where it comes from is that basically Homo sapien, for our safety and survival, the most appealing places provided prospect, visual access, and refuge, enclosure simultaneously. It's basically the ability to be seen without see without being seen. So this really comes from, you know, our Neanderthal ancestors who might have been hunting and needed, you know, some environments in which they could see potential prey without necessarily exposing themselves to any kind of danger themselves. So to illustrate this one, we've used a project which I'm very fond of, which was called the seed pod, which is a tensile membrane structure inspired by a seed in the Mauritian rainforest. And this structure was suspended from the trees. There are no concrete footings, there are no foundations. It's literally on a kind of spider's web of stainless steel cables that attached to the trees, and was installed, you know, in a day basically. But it's probably the lowest form of impact that you can have on the environment in terms of a building. And, you know, you can sleep in these pods and you have this kind of very cozy nest-like, almost like a human nest feel to it. So delight. And this comes back to a little bit the original message I tried to transmit, which is that this sensory richness and ambient variability are abundant in nature. If you go into a forest, you have, you know, a huge number of haptic sensations. You have texture, you have movement, you have smells, you have you know, sense. All your senses are illuminated from that experience. But we can do the same in the built environment. We can basically use the feel of wood and of stone, variations in temperature and light as we move through the space to provide sensory light. delight. So, you know, that's really the final end game of all of this, is to create spaces in which people feel alive, and can really enjoy their experience. And all of this together, beggars an important question. So imagine, for an instance, that the technological innovations that mankind has at its disposal were repurposed. We have huge and ever more ambitious scientific projects, but imagine if those scientific developments in genetics, microbiology, agriculture, architecture, software engineering, computer modeling, and material science were channeled away from the traditional anthropocentric objectives of a free market economy, and were instead used to develop a circular, nature-positive economic model focused on the health and well-being of the biotic community as a whole. So what I'm getting at a little bit here is do we have an opportunity to shift our intentions and our applications of technology, to use technology in a very different way, so that to better integrate mankind with his immediate environment? Because I think a lot of people are feeling that they're increasingly disassociated from the natural environment by moving from one box-like container to the other. Your box-like bedroom, you get into your box-like kitchen, you get into your little box car, you go to your little box office, and ad infinitum, you basically repeat that same existence with very little exposure to the natural environment and very little opportunity to interact with that environment. What we're asking the question is can we create, through hospitality, opportunities for people to see perhaps a different way of interacting with nature, a way of enjoying outdoor sports or hiking, cycling, and non-aggressive outdoor adventure activities, in alignment with the natural environment. So we're working on various models in this direction. One of our new ventures, Nomadic Escapes, is a nature-positive hospitality management company. And what we're really interested in is to address these fundamental challenges by creating camps and retreats that aspire to address biodiversity loss, that can help reinvigorate rural economic areas that have been in decline, and spaces where the guest itself can really overcome some of the mental health challenges that have been so predominant in the COVID-19 era, due to this idea of people being locked up in their homes for long periods of time. And I think many people have become aware of the implications for that on mood and sense of personal satisfaction. So perhaps that would be the greatest legacy of all, is this notion of environmental education, where people would come to these regenerative camps, would see how reforestation can be accelerated using technology and using the financial returns from tourism ventures to basically increase biodiversity and to improve the climate change mitigation of some reforested areas. It's also, again, within that context, the employment of people from the local community, as opposed to just importing hundreds of workers from elsewhere, is this notion of social inclusion, which goes hand in hand with rural economic renewal. And we're really interested in people who want to participate in those kind of projects, or invest in these kinds of projects, or have land which has got potential for rewilding. So really what we'd like to say is, if anybody wants to contact us and has some ideas in this direction, we'd be very, very happy to discuss those possibilities further.
Great, thank you so much, Louis. I already see a few interesting questions in the Q&A, but we'll leave that to the end. Pascal, if you can take over.
Yeah, give it a second try.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think this should cover the load, I think.
Looks great.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start from scratch. So in 2013, there was a tender, and out of the 30 registrations, the city of Amsterdam chose for our project, Hotel Jakarta. And the construction took over 2 years, but it went really quick because of the construction method that they used. And that's modular construction, and it went faster than normal. So what did it do for us? Let's see. Here we are. So we are a wood high-rise building, 35 meters high. We used 90% wood and approximately 10% concrete, which we used 20% recycled concrete. And as you can see in the modules, that these modules, sorry for this, these modules are more than 90% of the complete building. We used 6,000 cubic meters of FSC certified wood, grown in Germany. And after cutting one tree, there was a new tree replanted after being used. We have 176 modules prefab built with CLT, and as you can see here, you can really see how these modules are built and being stacked on top of each other like a Duplo or Lego. The complete building is finished in bamboo, so no paint or wallpaper is being used for finishing up the building. So from the interior perspective, we have a BREEAM Excellence certification with a score of 71.8%, and BREEAM stands for Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, and it's a certification for sustainable build. And it's being used now in more than 18 countries worldwide and nearly 600,000 projects in total. So that's really nice. So what do we actually do? So as you can see, we had a cutout of our building. And as you can see, we have the hotel rooms located here, but we have a thermal buffer, which we use to heat up the building with the sun during winter times, and passive sun protection during summertime. We have 1,700 square meters of solar panels in total, which we can use to have our complete building operational. So our building is using only solar energy, only everything related to the building. So everything which is built on top, like televisions, coffee makers, etc., that's extra. But it's calculated to have this complete building operational by only using solar panels. We use underfloor heating and cooling, so we don't have air conditioning, and the heat and cold we get that from the ATES, the Egg River thermal energy storage, and we pump it up as needed during certain periods of the year. Let's see, what can I tell you more? The natural ventilation. So we have natural ventilation for all the hotel rooms, but also all the main areas can be ventilated by just opening up windows and roof panels. So that's pretty nice. And then, of course, we have this beautiful subtropical garden of almost 500 square meters, and that, of course, needs water. So we are collecting rainwater, and we have gray water system underneath our hotel with a tank of 160,000 liters, which we use for sprinkling the garden, and there's approximately 2,000 liters per day going into the garden. So then it's also nice to use just the leftover water, the rainwater. So that's really really nice. Also, our indoor garden makes sure that our indoor temperature will cool during summertime with 6 degrees Celsius, meaning that our garden is using the same principle as, for example, oasis in the desert. So by water evaporating, the temperature will be lowered on a natural way. So not only our building is sustainable, but also our recycling waste management, what we do. We have, for example, our organic collector underneath our hotel. So all the organic materials will be shredded, being dried and picked up every 2 weeks. So we have a minimal of logistics going on in our hotel. And the rest materials are being used for a biofuel and fertilizer. And that's really nice to do something with that. But also our clothing from our staff is sustainable. And using a Dutch brand called Rockland, they are using overstock and parts of jeans which they cannot use anymore, and then they use it as our staff clothing. And in the end, if the staff clothing is out of use, then we will shred it and make furniture of it. So that's really nice. And last but not least, how does Hotel Jakarta looks? Well, I try to show it to you on pictures, but of course, in real life, it's even more beautiful. This is the area where the reception and lobby is, the area where the indoor garden is, swimming pool area, and as you can see, we use a lot of glass, letting the natural light coming in, so that we don't have to use that much light. You can see the solar panels on top of the atrium, the indoor garden, and the rooms prefab stacked on top of each other, and all wood you see here is the usage of bamboo. Another viewpoint. Architecture combined with the usage of wood. And you see the odd shape of the building forming a tip with marvelous overview towards Central Station and the Eye area, the River Eye area here in Amsterdam. Just an overview picture. So that was my presentation about the hotel. Of course, if there are any questions, please use the Q&A for this. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have plans visiting Amsterdam, please pass by.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pascal. Definitely, I think I've got some inspiration if I'm ever building a hotel of what to do. So now we have about 14 minutes left for Q&A, which is great. We have a moderator also looking at some questions, but I noticed this one actually during Louis' session from D. Lisberg. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. They asked, they said beautiful designs and lots of deep thinking. Can you mention if and how there were net positive impacts for nature and biodiversity in these buildings? Louis.
Okay, yeah, that's quite an interesting one for that particular project, one of those projects in particular. So the project we did in southern Sri Lanka was in the buffer zone of a very famous national park. But the actual safari experience within the national park for tourists was not great, to be perfectly honest. There was a lot of vehicles, there were traffic jams when there were leopard spottings, and it's kind of a chaotic environment in Sri Lanka for this kind of activity. So what we did is we created a series of ponds across the site. We created 6 ponds, which were essentially watering holes. But they were also used to recycle the wastewater from the site. So basically we had a high performance wastewater treatment system. And then the effluent from those wastewater treatment systems would go into these tertiary treatment systems, which are called reed beds, essentially. But what we did is we put the reed beds right in front of the accommodation units. So from the front deck of your tent, you could see elephants coming in and drinking water, because we didn't put any fences. So in fact, that whole project was our first effort at large-scale rewilding, whereas our knowledge probably wasn't as good as it might have been at the time of doing that. I think we learned a lot from it in terms of how you can create environments specifically to attract animals. And how I ended up sort of explaining this to the owner is, you know, hospitality doesn't need to just be about human beings, okay? If human beings are coming to a place to look at wildlife, then maybe you should extend your hospitality to the wildlife itself, and that would probably result in a better experience for the human guests. So now when I approach a sort of wilderness project or a project in that kind of environment, I ask myself, you know, whether we can extend our hospitality offering, or to what extent we can extend it to embrace some of the other wildlife species. We're doing a project in India in a very sensitive environment at the moment. Huge number of migratory birds coming through that area. So of course we've been selecting nesting trees, fruit trees that would be, you know, would help them on their way. So that's really how we've changed our approach to the landscape design of these projects now. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please add them to the Q&A. I know Melissa also had some, so Melissa, go for it.
Hi everyone, Melissa, Operations Manager from Sea Going Green. Yeah, today I'll be fielding some questions from the audience. So as Ali said, feel free to add them into the Q&A section or the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So my question is for Pascal. I was wondering, how do you think the tourism and hospitality industries will evolve towards adopting more kinds of these nature-based solutions? And what do you think this will look like?
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, well, especially with during COVID, you see that at this moment travel is really going slow. We have at this moment a lot of locals visiting our hotel, which is nice, and which leaves also a better footprint than using a lot of airplanes. I think that integrating sustainable methods in hospitality is doing really well for the environment, and is also giving going on holiday a better feeling than leaving a larger footprint. So here in Amsterdam, we have a group called the Sustainable Hotels Group, where we sharing information about how to make your property more sustainable. We were lucky to build a sustainable building from scratch, but there are smaller methods just by adopting smaller things like waste management, which is really easy to start with. It is, from our perspective, a good step in the right direction.
Okay, thanks for that, Pascal. I have another question for Louis. And Pascal, of course, you can chime in as well. But for existing hotels and resorts, do you think that their entire infrastructure for these kinds of nature-based designs needs to be completely redone, or can this be added to existing infrastructure? And is this affordable? Can this be made affordable as well?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because the main challenge we have is the existing stock of hospitality that is currently already built. And this might have a kind of, this is not a very, I say this with no pleasure, is that quite frankly, maybe some of the distressed assets that are more conventional hotel assets that aren't aligned with the sustainability expectations of clients, or that have underlying weaknesses in their business model in terms of the new shift towards sustainable tourism, may not survive the COVID pandemic and the lockdown. So what we might see is a form of sort of natural selection, in which some obsolete models just become defunct, unfortunately, which is I say that with great sadness. But on a more positive note, I think that there is a huge amount that can be done, and it's not necessarily, as Pascal rightly said, it's not necessarily the obvious and the kind of glamorous solutions, but there can be things as simple as changing your way of dealing with pest control to a more sustainable option. Waste management, huge one, a huge amount of waste in the hospitality industry. Energy efficiency, this constant barrage of air-conditioned air that we're circulating around the planet in constant cycle, in many instances is insane. So can things be done? Yeah, sure. But what I would hope to see is as opposed to the normal sort of sustainability spiel that comes out of many government organizations, what I think really needs to happen now is if this huge amount of money is going to be released by public institutions for an economic revival or green recovery of some sort, I think that this really is now the time to really change the hospitality industry and finance those activities that many people have been wanting to do for a very long time and haven't had the opportunity to do so. And now I think ideally the European Union, now's the time, right? If you're going to shift the entire hospitality industry into a more sustainable and more responsible model, then there will not be I hope there won't be a second opportunity like this, but that would be my feeling. And there are multiple ways of doing it: improving insulation, rainwater collection, rainwater filtration, stormwater management. You just have to go through the BREEAM list of credits, and you can find a whole host of different options. Not all of them will be easy to implement, particularly in existing structures, but there are many very interesting things that you can do with new technology now. For example, heat reflective paints that didn't exist previously, where you can improve the thermal performance of a building simply by repainting it. That kind of thing is accessible to many people. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely, yeah, we completely agree that we think this is definitely the step forward. I'm just going to try to field one more question from the audience. We have one here. I think this kind of rings true for both of you. What are the main differences in putting nature-based solutions into practices in both the context of urban and rural spaces? Of course, both of you have done so in these different spaces, so it would be interesting to hear your feedback.
Pascal, do you want to do rural and I'll do, do you want to do urban and I'll do rural?
Sure. Shall I start? Yeah. Well, the thing is that by using, for example, wind or natural airflow through the building, it's just using these kind of methods like solar energy, rainwater collection, and wind or natural airflow, especially in an urban area, is from our perspective, really good, because you don't have to use that much energy and have your building operational.
From a rural side, so I think you can see from behind Pascal that they've created a sort of green oasis in the heart of Amsterdam, which is, it almost looks tropical. It looks almost like he's here in Mauritius. But from a rural perspective, I think the potential is much, much larger. So what we've been very, very interested in is this kind of the use of hospitality to change the management system of a lot of underused or undervalued real estate. A lot of areas of, are not necessarily perfectly adapted to the industrial farming model, and many of those areas should be given back to nature. And if you're going to give them back to nature, then why not try and regenerate them and create an abundant natural environment? One of the ones that we've come across recently, which I find a fascinating challenge, is brownfield sites. Quarries, mines that have been, abandoned or that are no longer financially viable in 21st century Europe. Many of those spaces, instead of leaving it as a pile of sort of slag and machinery, rusting machinery, you could create these incredible oases from these spaces. And I think that would be what interests me, is to really try and say, okay, how can we identify these sites, and how can we harness political support to really improve some of these locations that have been damaged by the first industrial revolution, let's say.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those answers. I think it has been a really inspiring session for everybody. We have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to quickly close off. The hour flew by. Just a reminder that the recording will be available on the platform next week, so please be sure to sign up for the platform and our community. The Sustainable Tourism community is new, so please join. We'll be hosting a few more events during the rest of the year, and we'll also be publishing our 5 main takeaways from this session in the coming days. So Pascal and Louis, I'd like to thank you again very much. Your sessions were really inspiring, and hope we get to collaborate again soon. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
All take care. Bye-bye.